Hi everyone, I'm Rituparna, and on behalf of Doing Sociology, I welcome all of you to this book discussion on practices of sociology in Nepal, a book co-edited by Pranab Kharel and Gaurab KC. The book was published by Vajra Books in 2021. Let me begin by briefly introducing it. Sociology and anthropology in Nepal have so far shrugged off identifying its Nepali identity. One of the reasons for this is Nepali practitioners' relentless reliance on the West. The cookie-cutter approach of disciplinary history writing tradition is worn out that competing perspectives and alternative narratives are still rare. The practices of sociology in Nepal is both a representative and reflective dialogue that analytically submerges into the sociology of and on Nepal. In assessing and reassessing Nepali sociology, the centricity of this book revolves around the idea of practice. All 7 chapters are coherent in charting out different shades of practices within the university setup. The book raises pertinent questions on the need for cross-fertilization of ideas and methodologies among and between various social sciences. It also points towards the neoliberal pressure exerting on the social sciences at the universities in Nepal. The book makes an honest plea for re-examining both pedagogic and epistemic issues facing Nepali sociology and anthropology. The first-hand experiences of all the contributors have kindled the fresh and critical debates on disciplinary history, teaching, supervision, research, writing, publications, and institutional politics. Today, we have with us the editors of the book, Pranab Kharel and Gaurab KC, as well as Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri and Professor Swatahsiddha Sarkar as the discussants. I welcome all of you to the discussion, and let me begin by briefly introducing our speakers today. Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri has retired from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, CSSS, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. Her research interests have been on the making of the public discourse in modern India. Her early work focused on nationalism, colonialism, and feminism in India. Since the early 1990s, she has been looking at the changing nature of public discourse in the context of both neoliberalism and the rise of majoritarianism. Professor Chaudhuri's selected published work include Sociology in India, Intellectual and Institutional Practices, Feminism in India, The Practice of Sociology, Refashioning India, Gender, Media, and a Transformed Public Discourse, and Doing Theory, Locations, Hierarchies, and Disjunctions. She is also one of the co-founders of Doing Sociology. Swatahsiddha Sarkar is a professor at the Center for Himalayan Studies, University of North Bengal, Darjeeling, and was the director of the center during 2019 to 2022. Having nurtured a keen interest in Himalayan studies throughout his career, Sarkar has been engaged in Nepal studies since 2015. His book, which came out in 2013, was titled Gaurkhaland Movement, Ethnic Conflict and State Response, while he also co-edited a volume in 2013 titled Ethnicity in India, Issues in Community, Culture and Conflict. Meanwhile, he is presently eagerly anticipating responses to his recent monograph, Contours of South Asian Social Anthropology, Connecting India and Nepal, to be published by Routledge in 2022. Pranab Kharel is a sociologist associated with Chautari, a Kathmandu-based academic non-profit. His research interests include state, politics, law, media, disciplinary history, intellectual biographies, and migration. Kharel's writings have appeared in the journals Society and Culture in South Asia, Studies in Nepali History and Society, Kathmandu School of Law Review, and Dholagiri Journal of Sociology and Anthropology. He was trained at JNU, New Delhi. Kharel is the co-editor of Practices of Sociology in Nepal. Gaurab KC is an assistant professor who teaches sociology at Kathmandu School of Law. He is also a member of the Academic Research Department at KSL. His research interests include disciplinary history, intellectual biography, migration, law, political violence, victimology, street economy, urbanization, media, and social movements. He is also the co-editor of the book Practices of Sociology in Nepal and a regular contributor in popular national dailies published from Kathmandu. I will now ask first Professor Chaudhuri to begin this discussion by giving her opening remarks on the book. If you could talk about some of the main objectives of the book, as well as how you think the book will contribute to existing scholarship, and if you see interlinkages between the practice of sociology in Nepal and India, as well as ma'am shed some light on the scope of this kind of work in the future.
Thank you very much, Rituparna, and thank you for holding this book discussion. Much delayed, and I sort of partly responsible, Pranab and Gaurab, for this delay. My apologies, because first the pandemic and then I retired and we were not able to do it earlier. But better late than never, because this is a very, very important book. And I would like to sort of share it. I don't know whether I'm showing it the right way. I don't know the online system. But The Practices of Sociology in Nepal is an important book. I am really delighted to have the opportunity to read it, because as the authors of the book remark, though India and Nepal are so close by, close neighbors, very often are familiar with each other in terms of university visits perhaps, but very, very ignorant, particularly from the India side of the story, of what is happening in Nepal. And yet, as I read the book, I found that there were so many similarities and possibilities of conversations going ahead. But let me be a little more systematic and go with what Rituparna asked about what are the objectives of the book. And I was also fascinated not just by the text and the content of the book, but the style of the book, the making of the book, which begins the introduction, that it emerged from several years of guff, I don't know how it is pronounced in Nepali, that took place between the two editors and other colleagues in many informal settings. Now, this story of informal settings, lot of discussions, what is called adda and aparts, JNU, where I spent most of my life, a lot of learning took place outside the classroom. So we belong to a region where the oral tradition, as Professor Yogendra Singh would often mention, a tradition of talking, a tradition of discussing, and a tradition which was not so geared to writing down. So we don't have the kind of tradition which is established in the Western global northern universities, where they have a certain propensity perhaps to speak a little less than us, but are always ready to write down, whether it's recorded history of macro structures of states and nations, or if it is micro histories of what is happening in the universities. There is a certain kind of tradition of writing which we lack. So I would really like to congratulate the editors, Pranab and Gaurab, for putting this book together, laying down the foundations for later scholars to look back. As you so rightly mentioned, because I was also prompted to edit that first book of mine early in my career, The Practice of Sociology in India, where I too, like you, and you're right, we were baffled by many of the practices of sociology and anthropology in Nepali universities, such as the forms of disciplinary writings, academic writings, and publications. Additionally, other issues included curriculum design, classroom engagement, and absence of cross-fertilization of ideas, in addition to obsession with Western theoretical position. This is a story which I think it's so important that you put it down, because this is a story which is part of our stories, of all other societies in the global South, where we've had overdependence on the kind of knowledge practices and knowledge writings which emerged from the global North, where we did not have the confidence to articulate what we felt were important in our context. So important in our context may seem quite ordinary, banal in the global academia circle, because we are talking about why are our journals so shabby? Why do we have a certain unprofessional attitudes whether we are heading departments or whether we are editors of journal, a tendency to constantly, promote maybe friends and relatives, have factional groups, etc., which we also often feel, and I think wrongly, are something which is only ours in South Asian context. Because I think similar issues appear in the global north. There too, they would have problems of ego, problems of, maintaining their boundaries, making sure that others don't take over. It's not that those tensions do not exist there, but they have a historical legacy and confidence to articulate in a fashion which is more acceptable in the global academic literature. Whereas in our context, we always felt that, like the modernization theory tale, that we are sort of lagging behind. We are not as smart as them. We are not as professional as them, And I think that those kind of questions haunted us. Indian sociology, coming back to Rituparna, what you're talking about, relationship between sociology in India and sociology in Nepal, and could extend it to sociology of other South Asian countries, is that we have had that lag, that sense of inadequacy, that inability to say, this is how we feel, this is how we write, and these practices are not unique to us, but are structurally related to the kind of societies which we inhabit and occupy. One of the things which struck me about this book is that most of the essays made a very careful connection between the macro political, economic, historical, regional location and the micro politics of departments or editorial questions, or what kind of article should be published, or what kind of funding comes from abroad, or which kind of subjects are given preferences in the funding. These are important questions, extremely important questions, because when these debates take place in the global north, the debates are articulated from a point of privilege, where they would say, who should we fund? What kind of people should we fund? What kind of topics should we fund? Whereas in our context, it is, what kind of proposal should I write to get funding? It's a complete reversal. Now, this relational context between the global north and the global south is something which we forget. And we get caught up in the buzzwords which are created in the global north. So in the global north, today they talk about decoloniality, they talk about decolonizing, etc. But the question is that many of us here, without those words, without that jargon, have grappled, and many of us have not had the right language to express what the editors here call the bafflement. Why do we teach certain courses? Why do we choose certain books? And we did a certain kind of exercise before the co-edited book that we have of Doing Theory with Manish Thakur. And I remember, which I didn't even know, we had this conference and we called Professor Karna, who was one of the senior professors in Patna. And he said you had an American professor, I forget the name, who came there in the 60s. And he had a key role in establishing both the curriculum as well as the structure of the courses. So it is hands-on, So there are possibilities to extend the question that you asked, Rituparna, of future research explorations. The second I was struck is about comparison, that even in India, in the late 50s, early 60s, we had the community development programs. We had American funding for that. We had a certain promotion of a certain kind of village studies, which took place. Perhaps, I don't know, I'm ignorant about the Nepal context. In India, prior to 47, which was independence for the British colonial rulers, we had a slightly different trajectory. You had the three presidency universities, Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, and had some sort of academic sociology, social anthropology introduced in these universities, which were not directly related to applied sociology or directly related to developmental questions. And it would be interesting to explore what was the situation in Nepal at that point of time. And in those writings, pre-47, you did have that same kind of angst. Do we adopt Western theory or not? Should Western theory be rejected or not? We have the rise of Indology and a celebration of the textual tradition in India. And I think some of these questions are not irrelevant. They were not irrelevant then. They're not irrelevant now. Because there is a tendency very often, even when we speak in conferences or classroom situations, where people would say, why do we teach Western theories? Why don't we have our own theoretical framework? This kind of articulation ignores the fact that theories emerge in specific historical social context. And from the beginnings of capitalism, which itself was a global phenomenon, and the spread of colonialism, we occupy a structure where we are united, not homogeneously, differentially, unequally, but we are there simultaneously at that point of time. So theories which have emerged of the classical theories, whether it is Marx or Weber or Durkheim or Zimmel, are dealing with questions of capitalist modernity, modern rationality, estrangement, alienation, disenchantment, which are part of the contemporary phenomena. They're talking about the rise of modern ideologies like nationalism, challenges to social sciences methods. They're relevant to us. They're extremely relevant to us, and we must not throw out the bathwater with the tub. It's important to debate with those theories, find out what works, what does not work, but not a kind of celebration of whatever is indigenous and a kind of negation of whatever is not indigenous, because even the concept of indigenous is complicated. The other point that I found very interesting and possibilities of future collaborations and comparison is the difficult, but what I feel, and I may be a little in disagreement with the editors here, the productive relationship between sociology and social anthropology. And the essays here reflect that the social anthropology tended to look at the esoteric. They were operating with the binary of the modern civilized and the barbaric others. So you wanted to talk about, death rituals, esoteric questions, ghosts and spirits, etc. And sociology was dealing with the modern. I have no disagreement with that. But what I would feel is that anthropology has also made great leaps forward. So the anthropology of the 40s or 50s or 60s is not the anthropology which we witness today. After the new anthropological method, reflexivity, a greater awareness of power and location, hierarchies. So you would have texts which we wouldn't have had in the 50s or 60s, anthropology of the state, anthropology of colonialism, anthropology of the everyday, which is also looking at, broader relations of ruling. So I feel that there is a possibility of sociology and anthropology re-engaging, provided both sociologists and anthropologists are able to address the ghosts that haunt them and the difficult legacies they have inhabited. So to go back to the point which Rituparna asked me, if I recall, was the main objectives of the book. And I think the main objectives of book are to document why the object, the PhDs, the learning, the journals, the classroom teaching, why are they like how they are? Because in popular culture, in popular imagination and popular discourse, they'll say, we are not as good as people are abroad. We are lacking. Our students are not so sharp. They have a language problem, and that's another possibility of comparative study between India and Nepal, because we also have a huge question. In fact, doing sociology, we would love to have multiple language articles and discussions don't have the resources for it. So we are not able to reach out to a much wider audience, which we could have had if we had. So language is a big issue. But the point that, we're talking about the main objective is this book waves the groundwork and looks sociologically at the causes for the state of affairs in the academia, in sociology in Nepal. They think this is an object of inquiry worth pursuing. Whereas very often in the global north, they did not write down unless you have, very macro critiques like C. Wright Mill's Sociological Imagination, where he critiques the practice of American sociology, which was influenced by the market research, a certain kind of mechanical, quantitative methods, which in turn were influenced by the imperatives of what would be sold in the market. But think about the power. C. Wright Mill's Sociological Imagination becomes a global masterpiece, which I love to teach and which is taught today. For us to make what we write a global phenomenon is extremely difficult. So when you write the practices of sociology, you write the practices of sociology in Nepal. When I wrote the book or edited the book, The Practice of Sociology, the publishers asked me, you must write in India. And I said, but why? Why? I mean, do I have to always clarify where I am? Whereas those in the global north, they would not write practice of sociology in Britain or practice of sociology in Norway, okay? Because the assumption is that they're speaking for everybody. So it's important for us to document the micro dynamics of how our practices are influenced, our research, etc., but also be able to communicate to a wider audience and say, look, we are discussing pure sociology, full-blooded social science. We're not just telling you a story about what's happening in Nepal. And I think this book has been able to do that. It has been able to put in the details, but it has been able to touch the structural issues, which lead to the kind of issues which you have described in this book. A contribution you take to existing scholarship, I think I've already addressed the question, as I have addressed your third question, Parna, about linkages between India and Nepal. I'd like to come back later, but I would very much like to hear the other speakers before maybe I can come in again. Thank you once again very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhuri. We'll definitely come back to you. Professor Sarkar, so I now welcome you to address the audience on the book and put your comments forward.
Thank you, Rutuparna, and thank you, the Doing Sociology crew, for giving me this opportunity, and most importantly, for bringing this book for discussion in this platform. And this, I think, is a very commendable work that you all have done. So yeah, this is, I don't know how to play my role, because in a certain sense, I have been associated with the book project from I would not say from its inception, but for a long time. So it's in that way one may find that my assessment may be colored with certain kind of subjective understanding of the issue. So having said that, I will try to make my assessment as objective as it could be. And yeah, and obviously it's a big thing to share a dais with Professor Chaudhuri and along with the editors and also the other contributors. Many of them I could see that they're in the participants list. The names are there. Anyway, so let me begin by saying that this is, as Professor Chaudhuri has mentioned repeatedly, that this is really very an important book. And why important and how to look at it is something that we have already heard. So possibly, I don't know what else is remaining for me. So after having so engaging a discussion that Professor Chaudhuri has made, but still, let me try. So what I think that this book is having 6 chapters, right, along with one introduction. So in that way, could be one can say that more or less 7 chapters in that sense, and it covers around more than 200 pages, a little more than 200. And in this particular book, I think something has been done which makes me argue that this book has initiated a kind of a very timely and a kind of an engaging debate. Right. So why timely? Because I think this book is perhaps for the first of its kind in Nepal. I know that there have been dozens of writings are available on the disciplinary history being noted down in the context of Nepal by different Nepali scholars, or scholars from Nepal rather. But this book is of a separate kind, of a different kind, because I think that this book conceived in Nepal at that juncture, and I think Professor Chaudhuri has also hinted at this, that when this is necessary to take note of, that when we are actually becoming increasingly aware of the various manifestations of sociology, that it's not simply the global version of sociology that's going to dominate the globality of the sociological discourses. Rather, I would like to take help of maybe one Chinese sociologist who puts it very fascinatingly that perhaps the age of a post-Western sociology, or rather sociologies that have come up. And I want to read, or I want to place the book's relevance in that context. And that could be a very interesting way to start with the book. And that's how I say that this book is very timely. And why engaging? Because I find in this book that this book offers a fresh perspective. Fresh in the sense, in the case of Nepali context, I mean, which however is not very fresh in Indian context. And this fresh perspective, to some extent, I find that this has a kind of a similarity with another kind of a perspective that nowadays being called as standpoint epistemology. That means to explore the interplay between one's social status and one's epistemic status, while thinking about disciplinary practices or doing the historiography of discipline. So I think this has been very aptly being situated in the book. And these are the 2 comments that I wanted to make before I initiate my discussion on this. And specifically, this fresh perspective, therefore, could see the privileging of the personal reflections, the encounters and experiences of the contributors who these issues, however, otherwise been ignored in the sense that they were given a peripheral status in the overall treatment of an approach, or being an approach in the context of looking at disciplinary history in the Nepali context. And that is why it is fresh to my mind. And this is how this book, as Professor Chaudhuri has rightly mentioned, tried to document the trajectory of the discipline in Nepal and over the years. And I think that's possibly the way that they have tried to engage with the book's idea. And as the title of the book mentions it, and which is having a very similarity with Professor Chaudhuri's own contribution, the practice of sociology. And also, as I know that one of the editors are having a kind of a JNU affiliation earlier, so it's quite obvious that still Professor Chaudhuri and her influence could be seen even in the title of the book. So I would rather also like to know from the authors that how come that they conceived of this book? What were their motivations besides having a similar kind of a book that is there in Indian context? So I would be happy if they would reflect on this later on when I will complete my part. So yeah, so in case of what we could see that in case of Professor Chaudhuri, that practice, as I go, if I go by the book that I have referred to, that where she mentioned that the practice that by which what she means is basically the conglomeration of the experiences that includes both the teaching and research, right? So it's in that way the practices of sociology the way being documented in Indian context by Professor Chaudhuri were mostly being the reflections of a kind of a missing link, as she pointed it out, that the missing link between what is being taught in the courses and how the teachings are being received by the students. Or in other words, the kind of the disconnect that one may in fact notice the way sociology is being studied and where it is being studied, the society context, right? So it's in that way, therefore, what comes up for Professor Chaudhuri and perhaps for this book and perhaps for the whole idea of practices of sociology is the very context of the interaction between students and teachers so far as the teaching of the discipline is concerned. So it's in that way to look at the book through this frame. What I could see that similar kind of effort has been done in the book and the book that we are having for today's discussion, where this gap of or the disconnect that I am talking about between the discipline and its pedagogical practices are being shown. And also this book, one could see that how contributions on the issues of institutional politics, journal publication, landscape, research practices, and issues of vernacularization of discipline in the context of Nepal, that got serious amount of emphasis and also being covered within the pages of the books, So this is how the various forms of practicing sociology, so far as the 6 chapters are concerned, are more or less being covered in the book. And besides this, I think I would like to comment on the introduction, which I found is a very serious and engaged one, and where the introduction touches upon several issues of really very worth significance, and one should ponder over all these issues and questions, like say the possible inventories of South Asian sociology or South Asian imagination in the discipline of sociology, issues like decolonization of the discipline, engagement with global South scholarship, provincialization of Europe as a phenomena, the way that had happened in the way the courses were being articulated, or for that matter, a kind of the need for having a critical indigeneity scholarship, one that is open for pluralistic dialogue, more in the form of a South Asian dialogue, one may say. And these are the serious concerns that the introduction is having with it. And I have one observation I would like to place it here that that came to my mind whenever I try to go through the introduction again and again. So I find that the introduction is, as I said, is very dense and very provocatively being written down. But what comes to what is striking to me is that I don't know, that might be my reading, or maybe the faults in my reading. Maybe I would like to have this being corrected by both the editors since they are here. I do find that this dense introduction is probably not being synthesized the way the contributions that it covered. So that's one of the comment, and I would be very happy if the editors want to reflect on this, because this again will unfold several possibilities that why and how one then therefore can think of maybe another kind of a book in near future, where this dense introduction could have the scope to elaborate all aspects that it teaches, which however not being that way being addressed in all the contributions that it assembled. And besides this, I just want to place certain poses of mine for the reflection of both the editors, as also as I said that I could see many of the contributors of the book are there also in the participant list. So if they are also willing to respond, that would be more happier an occasion. So yeah, so one way of looking at practices of sociology, it's often being said that it's how we do sociology, and in that way, doing sociology is the right platform, or maybe the other name of practices of sociology. One can look at it in that manner as well. So how we do sociology, how we do engage with disciplinary, serious, theoretical, intellectual questions on the one hand, and how we do practice them in real sense of the term, both comes up when we talk about practices of sociology. So having said this, also one concern that comes to my mind is that can't it be like this, that the practices of sociology also is contingent upon the way the problem under investigation or the issue of our study itself, it also demands kind of transformation or maybe changes in the way practices of sociology should be or would be. So if it is so, then if it is a kind of an agreeable comment, then I would like to invite the attention of both the editors that how would they like to respond to this, that how our subject of investigation in fact contributes towards the creation or initiation of practices, maybe of certain new varieties even. So practices of sociology also, I would also like to know their views, though they have not talked about this, but since they have been working in this field and seriously engaged with this kind of disciplinary biography and the historiography of it. So I would also like to listen to them that how they see the practices of sociology outside the university system, one, and two, outside Kathmandu-centric institutional arrangement. Beyond Kathmandu, what is going on in the name of practices of sociology, if they could highlight on this, because this is not, as I said, not the remit, not falling within the remit of the book, but this would be helpful because we are having, as Madam has rightly pointed out, that we are having this opportunity of having a dialogue with sociology fraternity there in Nepal. So this, in that way, could help us underscore or map out the practices happening elsewhere also, besides Kathmandu-based university and institutions. And one particular point for that, I would also seek the intervention of the contributor, Rameshji, who is also here, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a particular section, as ma'am also has reflected on this, vernacularization of sociology. So how do you see the importance of it in bringing about changes in the way sociology in Nepal is practiced, or sociology in Nepal is needed to be practiced? And another comment, I would not say comment, another poser from my side would be that I find that there has been issues being raised in a single chapter. A chapter entirely devoted on that, the debate between disciplinary divide between sociology and anthropology as such. And my reading is that the debate, however, remains somehow inconclusive. Inconclusive in the sense that we find that the contributing author, Professor Luitel, who is also there, I guess, who is quite happy in making the distinctions crystal clear, and also trying to argue that this distinction is beneficial for the growth of both the disciplines, perhaps. However, when we read the introduction, we find that the editors are not very cool with this position. They rather used sociology and anthropology, rather social anthropology, I would say, interchangeably. And even if we read another chapter immediately after Luitelji, if I'm not mistaken, the chapter by Dr. Puttashonta, who covered the journal landscape. And there also comes up one comment that if I am to read it, the narrative that is there in the chapter, that the journals bearing sociology and anthropology in the title are having more longevity in terms of their continuation and contribution, rather than when the journals are appearing with singular, either in the name of sociology or in the name of only anthropology. So that means what I came out of all this with the reading, that the debate is probably inconclusive. So would you like to make any conclusive statement in this regard? That's one issue as my poser to you. And finally, that is related with the research practices, because I could also see one chapter in that, in the book itself. Do you think that gatekeeping of knowledge plays an important role in the way research practices in Nepal is continuing? By this, I think I have given enough clue to reflect on this. And with this, I would like to say I have completed my comments and posers being placed, right? Thank you, Rituparna, please take over.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarkar. So Pranab and Gaurav, if you would respond to both the discussants.
Yeah. Thank you, Rituparna. I think I'd like to go first. Thank you, Professor Chaudhuri and Professor Sarkar, for your incisive comments on the book.
Succinct observation on the book and making such a wonderful and intriguing comments. So I think that I have learned, or we have learned amply, I mean, what we need to think of if we engage in a similar kind of a work in the future. So due to the instability of the internet, I couldn't correctly heard what Dr. Sarkar was asking about regarding to the, well, I heard about the term gatekeeping, but I couldn't heard the entire question. But anyway, but I don't have much comments because I just like to listen today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gauravji. I think because of the instability in the internet, I think we could not communicate as well. Anyways, as I was saying, I'd like to thank Professor Chaudhuri and Professor Sarkar for their incisive comments. While I agree on most part with what Professor Chaudhuri said, that the book tries to document the practices. That's one of the objectives of the book, and that's been the relationship. And I was particularly struck by her comment on how she was able to show what we actually tried to do, the linkage between the macro political structures and the micro issues of everyday sort of conversations that we have. And yes, of course, the everyday aspects of our practice is something that needs to be documented, because I think that is where our actual sociology or social science as such takes place. The reflections, the dialogues, they are a very important and integral part of the conversation, if you will. And but the irony is that's not given much importance, because I think our major preoccupation seems to be with thinking about the macro issues or macro structures. How do I think of it? I think that's also a personal choice that as a researcher you make. You may choose to not consider that a valid object of inquiry. That's up to the researcher concerned. But I think in doing that, we sort of miss out on a lot of the everyday aspects, which actually create what even Professor Chaudhuri was hinting at in her presentation, at how we sort of practice our social science in this part of the world. And I think, and coming to Professor Sarkar's comment on how do we see, how do we see the book, and particularly his first comment that does Professor Chaudhuri's book, The Practice of Sociology, has anything to do with the book? In a way, it has, because even though between the editors and the contributors, some of the contributors of book in the initial years, and this is around 2015, we were having a lot of conversations on how can we document this kind of an issue. I chanced upon the book, and then it struck to me that we should be in a position to do similar kind of an exercise. So in that way, you can say the idea of the book is also generated out of Professor Chaudhuri's text. Moving on, Professor Sarkar also had a question on the relationship between the introduction and the chapter. I think at a personal level, I think I've shared this with Professor Sarkar on many occasions, but let me just reiterate myself. I think the way we conceived, I mean, we as in Gaurabji and myself, the way we conceived the introduction of the book was that, of course, we will raise issues that have been raised in the subsequent chapters, but we will also raise other issues that are pertinent to the practice of sociology, especially in the university setting. So therefore, the introduction sort of does operate at two levels. One, it raises some general issues which, along with the other chapters in the book, it sort of complements them. But at other level, it tries to set a poser, just to borrow your word, Professor Sarkar, just try to pose a poser as to what the issues are and the issues that have not been documented so far. And you also had a question on how we could look at theoretical engagement and the real practice. I think on this, I think there are two issues as far as the Nepali context I could speak from that. I think we have, for most part, we have not given enough thought to the theoretical frame, if you will. And we've also not paid much attention to the real practice. So there already exists a gap between the theoretical engagement and the real practice. By theoretical engagement, I'm indicating whether any kind of local or local theories have been generated. But at another level, the theoretical engagement and the real practice, as we have indicated in the introduction, we often tend to borrow from the West. There is, as Professor Chaudhuri also hinted, there is no harm in borrowing as such, but then we are not actually able to do some sort of justice to that, because as Gaurav likes to put it, we try to fit the theory in our context, and we try to do it as one of the contributors of the book, Dr. Pratisonta likes to say, we like to do a lot of theory dance, but we actually don't sort of reflect upon what kind of engagement are we doing. And then subsequently, you also had a question on does the problem under investigation lead to practice? I think it does. It does, and that's precisely one of the issues we wanted to highlight through the book. If you allow me, I am particularly skeptical of this universal versus particularizing kind of a debate that we have in sociology and anthropology, because what is considered universal, that is particularly theories coming from the global north, were also particular at certain junctures in their origin. So and because of various reasons that we are very much aware of, they became universal. So I think therefore, if we want to explore this idea that does a subject under investigation lead to practice and creation of some kind of theoretical framework, I think we have to pay attention to I mean, for me, we have to pay attention to the immediate dynamics that are at play. Of course, I do not negate the global forces that will be at play or the historical context that we will be operating in. But for me, the local dynamics remains one of the most important sites. And moving on to some of your other queries, how do we see practice of sociology outside the university and outside Kathmandu? As far as outside Kathmandu is concerned, I am not actually in a position to comment in some confident way, because I have very little experience of how things are practiced outside. Probably my colleagues who are also there in the audience, Dr. Luitel and Dr. Tika could possibly add, because they may be more familiar, or other colleagues who have contributed in this chapter may contribute there. But outside university framework, I think there's been a lot of social science being practiced outside university in Nepal. For example, one of the institute that I am affiliated with, Maitrayee Chaudhuri, which many of the other colleagues here, my contributing colleagues, are also affiliated with, has been doing a lot of work in that field, and particularly sociology and history, that two disciplines that seem to get a lot of attention there. So we have a lot of activities outside university, both in the form of academic NGOs or even otherwise. And I would put it there. So if more things are there, I think I'll respond later. Thank you. Over to you, Rituparna.
Right. Thank you so much, Pranav and Gaurav. Professor Chaudhuri, do you have any other questions for them?
I think whether some of the contributors could speak, that would be very nice, so because I think there are very interesting pieces on the journal, on sociology, social anthropology, and its bifurcation. So first, if any of the contributors would come and speak, and then maybe, one could come back again.
If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand or unmute your mic. Alternatively, you can also put down questions in the chat box. Okay, so maybe by the time people write, or
maybe I could come in, because I will otherwise forget what I thought was important. One of the points which the editors had mentioned was that they didn't intend to, but there was no writing by any women journalists, women sociologists, sorry to say. It would be interesting whether this could be perhaps amended by having another edition where you could have the experiences of how would gender make a difference in that. That was one possible comment that I have. The other thing I was interested in, and I had written about, the question of ethnicity and ethnic identity politics, which had a very important dynamic. And, we just heard that the local dynamics in Nepal, just like the local dynamics in India, are sometimes more important than some of the global dynamics. But I would want some clarification from the editors about exactly what was it that they didn't like about this whole question of ethnicity-based identity recognition or legitimacy.
Oh, thank you, Professor Chaudhuri, for that. I think on the question of the women contributors, as we've said in the book, we made an attempt to reach out to some colleagues, but we could not somehow secure their contribution. And as you rightly pointed out, if we do carry out a next edition, probably we will, probably not, definitely we will be including women colleagues there. And on the question of ethnicity, I think it's not about we not liking the issue of ethnicity-based identity. I think the first chapter after introduction, I think there Dr. Luitel sort of points out how ethnicity was sort of an issue in then joint department of sociology and anthropology, and he sort of puts a picture where ethnicity seems to have played a role in the split of the department. Although, and something that when we were putting this book together, pointed out that one of the prominent advocates of ethnicity-based identity happened to be a sociologist in then joint department, Dr. Krishnavadu Vachachan, and someone with a lot of influence and repute, not just within Nepal, but even influence outside Nepal. So that was one, I think, something which I think Dr. Lutel does mention in his book. So I think, but the fact that we did not, I mean, we had reservation on the identity issue, I think that's not how I see it. But I personally, I may have my own way of looking at it, but not reservation as such.
The reason I asked this question, because I think it's an important question that many of us in our parts of the world have to address. Issues like, does, the whole debate, for example, the question between representation and recognition, which Nancy Fraser puts forward, that does identity representation enough or suffice, for any kind of genuine democratic possibilities or not. So I wasn't looking at your response so much as a personal level, but trying to sort of complicate it in theoretical terms, that how do we look at questions of identity assertion, and are all identity assertions similar? And if not, what is it which makes it different? And how does sociology as a discipline, which I very strongly feel has very strong potential for furthering democratic rights and democratic justice, is that how should we look at and address the question of identity politics? What are its strengths? What are its limits? So it's in that larger sense that I sort of wanted to raise this question.
Okay. Okay. If in that context, I think the question of ethnicity has been a central issue in Nepal, at least for the last 4 decades. I can say that safely. And in terms of how we've tried to reconfigure our identities. And also, if we look a little further historically, ethnicity, caste and ethnicity sort of have been clubbed together by the Nepali state since the 19th century, and identities have been molded around that. And the sociological literatures or anthropological literatures that have sort of responded to it have, I think, done it in at least 2 ways. One, they have tried to show one particular strand of literature has tried to show the syncretic relationship between different identities, and how those identities are a result of the syncretic interactions that have taken place, particularly works of people like Professor Pranab Sharma sort of stand testament to that. But after 1980s, if you will, the need and the articulation to show the distinction or distinctiveness, and if I'm to quote Professor David Geller, I think particularly after 1990, it was the question was more about playing out your ethnicity. That is particularly the way ethnicity was defined in Nepal after that was it was defined as being against the dominant Hindu identity. So if you are a non-Hindu community, then you would express your identity, ethnic identity in that way, and you would do it through your language, you would do through your other cultural attributes, so on and so forth. But how do we sort of located here. I think there are a lot of other factors that have sort of molded this question. We will also have to understand that the whole Maoist insurgency that took place here used the ethnic identity as one of the major launching pads of the movement. So that has sort of shaped the ethnic discourse, as has the other movements within ethnicity in Nepal. So I think the question of ethnicity remains a very, if I may put it, a very contested issue. And that is also reflected in the kind of scholarship that is generated. Our book may have documented it in a particular way, but there are other kinds of documentations that have been done on ethnicity, which speak from other lenses.
Thank you, because I think this is important. And going back to an earlier question which Ritupana had asked about possible, relationship, because I find the issues of ethnicity, cultural identities are very productive sociologically to explore if they are done across states and across nations, because the contested nature somehow becomes easier to deal with when you have a comparative perspective, Otherwise, emotions are very closely connected with it. And I'm glad that this has been mentioned. And in the manner in which you put forward in the chapter, I think what was very important is the actual politics at the ground level and the knowledge production. And I think this relationship is extremely important for any kind of future that we have to pay attention to, particularly when, Mr. Sarkar was mentioning about theorization, that this particular context within which we are located in any part of South Asia is potent. And we should be able to theorize from this context, not in isolation from other theories, but put forward our own argument and particularly foreground the role that politics of knowledge has.
Would anyone else want to add to the discussion? Perhaps one of the contributors?
Rituparna, can I?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. I'm Yuvraj Little, one of the contributors of the book. I wrote the article about the separation of sociology and anthropology department at Tribhuvan University. Responding to Professor Maitreyee's issues on ethnicity, I just would like to add one point in addition to what Pranabji has mentioned. In that article particularly, I brought the issue of identity politics in the larger context of Nepal's political debate of the time. So identity politics entered into the political discourse in Nepal after 1990s as in elsewhere. And it gained momentum during Maoist insurgency starting from 1996 and concluding at 2006 with the peace process. With the insurgency, the issue of identity politics got prominence in the national discourse, in academia, in media, and all these arenas of public life. So it did the same with the academia also. The issue of identity politics came within university system. It influenced or it penetrated the university system also. And my assertion in the article is that it penetrated somehow in the then joint department of sociology and anthropology also in different gamuts and in different projects. And most of the projects arrived in the name of the debate of inclusion and exclusion. First point. Second point, also the corollary of the first point, the issue of identity politics entered in our university system at a time when Nepal was promulgating the new constitution by Constituent Assembly, and the debate of state restructuring got prominence. and it was debated so much that the constitution could not be drafted by the Constituent Assembly for about 6 years or so. And the argument was that the name of the provinces, the boundary of the provinces, and the identity of the provinces should be declared based on single identity. And also at the same time, another argument was brought that there should be single province in the Madhesh lowland, the adjoining territory to India, called Madhesh. So the whole Madhesh province, Madhesh area, be declared as one province based on single identity of Madhesh. So most of the sociologists, not all, had a kind of perceived understanding that identity perhaps cannot be based on single issues like surname. And the broader understanding is that it keeps on changing. Identity is fluid, it is multiple, and it is based on the intersections of various social attributes in addition to ethnicity and cultural identity. So most of the sociologists, without having a deliberate discussion on that, had the notion that the way state structuring was being argued to follow the single identity issue perhaps is not the appropriate way. So we had kind of constructivist standpoint. And in that sec, the issue of identity-based politics came in that article. Thank you.
Very much. I think this has really clarified, some of the questions that I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Professor Sarkar, do you have any concluding remarks or questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you, Rituparna. I think two of my questions were not being responded to. If I may rewind them, one was with that I found the debate between sociology and anthropology, the way the idea has been pieced in the book, remained inconclusive. Whether the editors want to comment on that or want to make any conclusive statement for that matter. That is one. And the other one was Gaurab ji also raised a question that he could not follow the question because of, connectivity and all, was with gatekeeping. That gatekeeping of knowledge, how that influences or how that has influenced the particular field of research, practices in research in sociology in Nepal. And by that, what I mean actually that, to put it in a different way, that how scholars and their scholarship, right? How scholars and their scholarship, that becomes a binding force of doing research in a particular way and encouraging research practices in a particular way, and not the, taking your word, giving or rather narrowing down the scope of sociology from its plurality to towards a singularity or a monolingual voice. Is this kind of a thing that you might have seen in case of the practices, particularly in the field of research that is happening? This too, and also vernacularization question remained unanswered, non-responded rather. If the contributor, Parajuli ji, he is also here, Ramesh Parajuli ji. So if he wants to respond to that, how vernacularization is making an impact in Nepali context, sociology, practices of sociology, how it is getting influenced by that. These are the three issues which were still remained unresponded.
Okay, Dr. Sarkar, could you repeat your second query?
The gatekeeping one.
Yes.
Yeah. By that, what I mean that, do you think a necessary linkage between sociology that needs to become plural, or a kind of a pluralistic methodology, pluralistic sociology discourses are needed to be pieced in the field of research, if that is a kind of a proposition? So is it like that it is getting affected by certain kind of gatekeeping efforts? So that's what the question.
Okay. Gaurabji, would you like to respond?
Gaurabji is again, I think, not having.
I think Dr. Wanta has his hands raised.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I
Yeah.
just want to say a couple of things on the last point that Swatah just made about vernacularization. I think first we need to make the note that the term itself is actually hardly used in Nepal. I think you use it often in India simply because I think the default or assumed knowledge of production in terms of research, teaching, etc. is English, and if you do any of that, teaching, writing, research in any other languages spoken and written in India, it's often called vernacularizing that discipline. In Nepal, you actually do not have that term in uses simply because the dominant language of public life in Nepal is not English, it's Nepali. And so trying to write or read or do research in Nepali is not called vernacularization, right? So there is a difference between the relationship between our social science disciplines and the dominant language or languages in use in the particular national space. The other point I wanted to make, and these are not actually the points that Swatah asked in his remarks, but one of our influence, I think many different kinds of influences have gone into the making of this book. The particular title selected by the two editors resembles the title of the book by Professor Chaudhuri. But I think contributors in this collection have written reviews of other disciplines in the past. So our colleague Devendra Upreti has co-written a short monograph on the state of sociology and anthropology teaching in Nepal, published in 2014. I've written myself several reviews of practices of history and history research in Nepal, various length articles, and also a book in 2014. But I think clearly things that were happening in terms of disciplinary histories and disciplinary reviews of disciplinary practices in India and elsewhere were influential in thinking about the conversations that took place in our COF sessions that gave birth to this book. I think the idea is several years old, and it took us a while to get the book into print. So where did the influences come from, or that I think I've tried to sort of hint at that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Moving to Dr. Sarkar's query, is the dialogue between sociology and anthropology in Nepal inconclusive? If I may put it this way, the dialogue between sociology and anthropology in Nepal has been taking place at multiple settings, and university setting happens to be just one. Because if by that I mean the issues that sociology and anthropology raise. So in terms of issues, I think if you look at the long history of the discipline here, I think the object of inquiry for both the disciplines have been the same. And if I'm to borrow Professor Andre Bete's term, which he uses for India, and I would just like to sort of use that in the Nepali context, what is sociology in the West actually becomes anthropology in the non-West. So by that he means the kind of the kind of inquiry that sort of we make. So by that I would also like to indicate that the object of inquiry remains the same. The dialogue will in that sense be inconclusive because it will be going on. And I said university setting is only one space where issues raised by sociology and anthropology, as has been also indicated earlier by my colleague Dr. Luitel, that it is taking place in different settings. So when we move out of the university, say in the national politics, the way it is being framed will also sort of keep the dialogue going on, you know. So I think in that sense, you are right. If you are saying that is the conversation inconclusive, it is, I think, very inconclusive. And on the question of gatekeeping, I think, I thought gatekeeping in a different way. Thank you for clarifying it. So the plural way of doing sociology and anthropology, should that be the way? Yes, it should be the way. And I think there are some small efforts of doing sociology and anthropology. Basically, people who are not trained in the discipline also sort of contribute in their own ways, and also bring their own disciplinary sort of knowledge to sociology and anthropology. In Nepal, we've seen that, especially the historians doing it. And even within the discipline, I think your question that should there be pluralization or pluralizing of the discipline and methodologies? Yes, there should be pluralizing, because if I may put it like this, we have not actually figured out how we should be doing sociology and anthropology, despite the discipline having a long history. I think we are yet to sort of figure out ways. I mean, by that, I mean, we have been relying on some of the established methods, but then we have not sort of contextualized them enough to sort of create a methodology. Something which we indicate in our introduction, where we say, if we want to look at sociology and anthropology in Nepal, let's say from certain textual analysis, why not move to genres like literature and other genres where which have spoken much about the social processes. In fact, they have documented the social processes of Nepali history and society much better than, say, sociology and anthropology have done in some ways. So in that sense, pluralizing the methodology and thereby pluralizing discipline remains very much on card. Thank you. I hope I answer you, Dr. Sarkar.
Yeah, thank you, Pranabji, for responding to the issues. And also, if I may add, with the comments being made by Dr. Onta, thank you, Dr. Onta, for clarifying the context that vernacularization is not having the same kind of appeal and appellation, the way it may have its meaning in the disciplinary context in India is not the same in the context of Nepal. I agree to that. But however, I would again like to make a comment that even do not trivialize the problem that I was indicating at. So it's not about the terminology. What I was talking about, that if we still go by the syllabi that is being continuing in the universities, we do not have sufficient books in Nepali language comparable to the English texts which are there in the reading list. So that's what the problem that I was talking about. So is this urgency, or is that an urgency that Nepali sociology scholarship thinking of in a very serious manner? So far as the article that's there in the chapter, it talks about this, that this issue should be brought into the fore. And also I could see some of, I have some of the stuffs, like I would like to show this one. This is, I hope, if it is visible. I don't know.
It's not visible.
Oh.
Yeah, you have to unblur your background, I think. Then I think
this is my son's. I mean, my laptop, and he makes it. Is it now readable?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a book that also talks about the same thing, and it brings into the question of that how sociological discourses are needed to be seriously pieced in vernacular language. So I was curious to know that what sort of these practices are coming up, how many books are coming up, or whether this had been taken up as a project, by the university faculties, or maybe outside university, there are scholars who are working, how the translation project is going on the different kind of books which are there in English but not in Nepali. However, the requirement is to have enough literature in Nepali, which probably is not existing. So that was basically what I wanted to know, right? So if Dr. Onta or maybe the editors want to reflect on this. So the question still remains unanswered in that way.
I would like to add on this. In the domain of Tribhuvan University and sociology in particular, over the years, we are trying to incorporate publications or research publications particularly that is produced in Nepali language. While we develop or refine or update our curriculum, we have started to pay attention on that. Before, that was not the case. Point number one. Point number two, we have also increasingly paying attention towards contributions by non-academic persons, activists or NGO persons or community-based advocates, those kind of people. If the production has some merit that can contribute or that can add value to enlarge our understanding of the social reality, then without looking at person's academic background or credibility, we have started to take in that piece as part of the curriculum reading materials. And I think these small initiatives would help us to vernacularize sociology in the context of Tribhuvan University, not in the context of Nepal. Third point, the Dean's Office at Tribhuvan University, the Dean's of Humanities and Social Science faculty had declared that all the PhD researches, all the MPhil researches, all the master's degree thesis researches should be carried in English language. It was officially declared, and we resisted that, and we argued that the language is not that major issues. The quality of research is the major issues. So we should not bear any student who has not good command in English but write fluently in Nepali, but has credible research stuff. Then why should the student be barred just because of the language? Then legal points that the Dean Office was beginning to formalize has been postponed. And it has paved the way for our numerous students to write their dissertation in the language they have command in. So these are the small initiatives within Tribhuvan University and within the sociology department of Tribhuvan University that we have started to pay attention on parts of the vernacularizations. But the issue, the largest issue that Professor Swatahsiddha intends to make relates to the issue of translation and other issues. We have not been able so far to go on that extent. Thank you.
So perhaps we should wind up, and thank you, Professor Chaudhuri, Professor Sarkar, and to our two editors, Pranab and Gaurab. Yeah.
Rituparna, just before you wind up, may I put one point?
Yeah, sure.
This interaction today seems to be unusual in the sense that it brought Indian scholars, mostly sociologists perhaps, and Nepali scholars, interdisciplinary background, together to discuss on one of the contributions, contemporary contributions on practices of sociology in Nepal. I think this kind of interaction should be the beginning amongst us. So I would like to thank all those who coordinated, who initiated the idea for having such kind of discussion. And on top of that, I would like to put one modest proposal that if this book, this kind of books, these kind of contributions are useful to expand our understanding on sociology, then should we be also engaged in the larger context of South Asian scale? Perhaps can we collaborate? Can we synergize our efforts to produce a volume that would chart out the practices of sociology in South Asia, things like that. So I would like to request to keep in mind, I don't know who will coordinate, who will take the initiatives, but I think time has come that we need to collaborate, at least in the South Asian context, going beyond the national practice of sociology or anthropology, whatever, coming out of the box of the national sociology practices and collaborating and producing something in a collective manner. That would add value to expand and deepen the practice of sociology in this context. Thank you very much. This is just a modest proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's a beautiful note to end today's discussion on. So thank you to everyone for joining in. Thank you to our speakers and editors. We look forward to more.
Pranab, please one second more. One more second, if you allow me. I just wanted to make one correction. While introducing me, you said that I am anticipating a book which is to be coming out. I wanted to mean that the book has come out. And this is the book, and I don't know whether it is readable or not.
It is Counters of South Asian Social Anthropology.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So,
wonderful. So you should send us a copy for us to review.
Yeah. So South Asian edition is still not available, ma'am. Soon it comes up. I will definitely be sending to you for your comments and observations.